And the bookies are betting that there's now sort of a 70% chance that it's going to be revealed what happened on that fishing trip, which will mean something to people that watch Gavin and Stacey and will mean absolutely nothing to people that don't.
It means nothing to me, but there we go.
No, but I sat there and I looked at it and I was like, I can't believe you can bet on that. That's it's just, it's a funny side story from a sitcom. That's all it is, and you can bet money on that, which is absolutely crazy to me.
Yeah. Welcome to Talking Money. I think this is our third episode, Hannah, and we've got lots to talk about this week as always, but we're going to start with COVID cards. So we're speaking on Wednesday, and yesterday on Tuesday was what they're calling V-Day. Some very excited elderly people on TV and in the newspapers receiving their vaccines for the first time. So when you get a vaccine, this new Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, you get a little card from the NHS, which I'm sure I've had before with vaccines for sort of, what have I had before? MMR and things like that in the past, BCG as it was when we were at school as well. You get this little card that just has the date you received the vaccine, but these COVID cards might have some relevance for employment law in the future by the sounds of things.
Yes, I actually have a confession about this, because when I pitched this to you on Monday, I had just had a conversation with an employment lawyer and I thought, oh great, this is really, really interesting. But almost all news outlets got this wrong, essentially. We've been talking about something that people have been referring to as a vaccine passport for it's that term has been battered around for a little while actually, but quite recently certain ministers have been saying, yep, we'll have it. Others have been saying, nope, that's not happening. Classic government giving us mixed messages. But how the news was reporting this was that this was going to be almost a proof that you've had the vaccine and that you were going to have to carry it on your person at all times. So it would be this proof, essentially, you're immune, which obviously, could have knock-on effects. It might mean that, for instance, your employer would be like, well, great, everybody that's had the vaccine will come back in because we know that you're all safe and you're not going to pass it to each other and all the rest of it. News outlets, as I say, got this wrong. All this is, and there's a reason it feels familiar to you, it is merely a card that will have the date of when you had your first shot. And it's almost just a reminder, there's a place for a second date to have your booster jab, because we do need them in order for this to be effective. And there will be a place to put your name, but it's not an ID card. You are not required to carry it around with you all the time at all. I do not know where people got that from. To the extent that you're not even required to take it to your second jab, I think it's probably just quite useful for whoever's administering all this. But in the interest of not completely wasting this, the employment lawyer did say some things about people who perhaps actually don't really want to return to the office. Because there will be some people out there that have really enjoyed lockdown actually, and that don't really fancy the commute anymore and that want to spend more time with family. Now, that actually could be grounds for dismissal if they work in a particular firm that prefers people to be in the office. And the way this works is that we're allowed to essentially ask permission to work flexibly, work from home, and an employer can either say yes or no, and it's within their right to do that. But if a person finds himself in a circumstance where their request is denied, and then they say, well, this is ridiculous, I've been working from home for 10 months now, I can do the job from home, suddenly they find themselves in breach with contract, quite possibly. So people could become fired as a result of wanting to continue working from home, despite having proven that they can work from home, which is a bit of a shame. What are you guys planning to do? Because you actually run businesses.
Yeah, I mean, employment law is always one of these ones that's very tricky, and we always seek legal advice. I think, it'd be overstepping our boundaries for an employer to say you have to have a vaccine. And it's certainly not within any of our staff handbooks or our contracts of employment. So I think we'd need to change those before mandating a vaccine, and it'd be very, very rocky ground for us to to start treading on with our employees. It works for us to work remotely, and what we're doing is speaking to each member of staff, giving them a choice. So I suspect the future, once we do get to some return to normality, will be a bit of a blend of working from home, popping into the office maybe 1 or 2, 3 times a week if you want to, but having more sort of a hot desking scenario. It's interesting though, this idea of an immunity passport. So I was speaking to a government advisor back as early as I think April or May about this, and it's definitely being discussed at top levels of government. I mean, whilst we're seeing ministers this week rowing back a little bit and saying no plans for this, it's happening. It's an active discussion in the cabinet. I know that for sure. And we're also seeing private businesses. So Qantas Airlines is a good example, saying unless you've had the vaccine, you won't be flying with us. And of course, whilst employers might not be able to mandate vaccines for members of staff, private businesses have the right to refuse entry, to refuse service to anyone they like on any grounds, as long as it's not discriminatory. So, so Qantas, I think, is a good example. We'll see others follow suit. Football stadiums, entertainment venues. And I suspect it won't be a piece of paper. It won't be a little card, appointment reminder card. It will be an app on your phone. And it could be or be a role for that NHS app to sort of expand and say, well, you've now had the vaccine and therefore it's got a green light around it or something. And I love the idea of a wristband personally. I'd love to have a little COVID wristband, and you see other people with it. You can give them a hug and stuff as long as they let you. You can worry less when you're interacting on a day-to-day basis with other people.
I see the logic, but the idea of wearing a wristband permanently just fills me with horror, because if I want to wear a nice bracelet or something, it could kind of ruin my outfit, which I'm not so keen on.
Well, it's a business idea for you. You can come up with sort of attractive COVID bracelets.
Oh, that is a good idea. Yeah. But no, I mean, when I was talking to this employment lawyer in the context of, this COVID card will actually mean something more than it transpires it means, although I appreciate, we may be heading that way in the future. They did say it would be a very brave employer who tried to take on somebody or dismiss them on the basis that they hadn't had the vaccine. It's definitely walking a very tight line. And I think, while clearly firms are going to ban people for certain practices, although I wonder if there'll be any legal cases about that now I think about it, because is it discrimination? I mean, again, I don't think so.
No. Although lots of people in the country, and I'm leaving aside the sort of nutcase anti-vaxxers here, but lots of people in the country have got genuine concerns about having this vaccination. There was a Cantor study, a survey, I'm not sure how recently this was, but 11% of people said they probably wouldn't have it. 8% said they definitely wouldn't. So, we're talking about almost 1 in 5 people, not being vaccinated, and obviously a certain level have to have it for this herd immunity to come about. I think there's still, and I'm very much in favour of it. I think, I was joyous about some of the news coverage yesterday. Particularly, there was this 91-year-old chap on CNN being interviewed outside Guy's Hospital, and he was just the most British, English gentleman you can imagine. It was wonderful. It was just a great advert for the vaccine. So I'm enthusiastic about the vaccine, but I do worry that there's still lots of unanswered questions from the government. And one that I've been trying to get an answer to and failing spectacularly is I have antibodies for COVID. I had my test result through last week. What does having the vaccine do over and above having existing COVID antibodies? And I cannot get a straight answer from anyone about that, which I find very interesting. If the government, if scientists, if health officials, if they provided more information, gave clear answers to some of these common questions, I think that would increase confidence in the vaccine, and more people there'd be better take up.
I can possibly help you with that question. Obviously, I'm not an epidemiologist or anybody that understands the science behind this, but this is a question that I know has been asked by quite a few people, and LBC actually do a really good phone in, and people can ask whatever question they want about the vaccine. And they had somebody on that said, I've had COVID, why do I need the vaccine? I've already got antibodies. And essentially the doctor said, well, it's, you have antibodies, you probably have more protection than the typical person on the street that hasn't had the virus, but having the vaccine will mean that you have a better level of protection. Right. So it's almost just upping what you have, and I guess it means it's less likely that you will get it again if you've had the vaccine.
That makes sense. And I'll be first in the queue once I get called forward to have that vaccine. No problem with it at all. So that's COVID cards. Big news again in the world of personal finance this week, which is around gambling, and quite some significant moves, I think, in the world of gambling. The government's taking this quite seriously now, and they have announced, as a result of various reviews and commissions, that under 18s are going to be banned from playing the national lottery. Now, it's not coming into force straight away. We have to wait till next October for that. I think April for online sales to 16 and 17-year-olds. But are you a national lottery player? What do you make of it?
God, no. I've played. Funnily enough, the only time I've ever bought a scratch card in my entire life was actually on my 16th birthday, because it was back in the day where people actually hung around on high streets still, and I went with my friend to buy a scratch card because I could. I'm pretty sure I didn't win anything. I don't remember winning anything, and that's it. I don't play the lottery. I actually looked up some statistics as to my chances of winning the lottery, and I've got a 1 in 45 million 57,474 chance of winning the lotto jackpot, which isn't even the biggest one. There's things like the Euro Millions that are huge sums of money up for grabs, and your odds go down even then. So I'm not a lottery player personally, and I actually don't know anybody in my age demographic or younger that is.
No.
I find it, this whole sort of, can 16, 17-year-olds play the lottery? I find it hard to have a really firm opinion on this, because I don't imagine it's going to affect actually that many individuals, because there's always the sort of personal liberty versus protecting the vulnerable argument. And in this case, I almost think neither count, because I think there's probably so few people of that age demographic playing this. It's nearly negligible. The typical person that buys a scratch card is between 50 and 64 years old. So it's completely the wrong demographic. And the people that play the lottery, it tends to go up as you get older. But there is a surprising amount of people, actually. I was surprised to learn that about 70% of the general population that are 18 and above have played the lottery relatively often, whatever that means, probably maybe once a month, something like that, twice a month. But in general, this sort of 16, 17 dynamic are just slightly too young to have missed it. Because it's part of a gambling review, I think it's probably fair enough. I think if the government would just kind of, there was this one random issue, I would think, oh, well, it's like, do we need to be thinking about that now?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think it's this bigger picture here, and it's the way that gambling, it's so insipid in this country. It targets younger people. It certainly targets the most vulnerable in society, and I think part of this review is looking at whether gambling firms can also sponsor and advertise on sporting, football shirts, that sort of thing, because whilst they're not directly targeting children by doing that, children are so impressionable that if they see their favourite football player wearing a Paddy Power or a Betfair or any of the other gambling brands, that is going to be ingrained in their thinking. And then once they do have the facility to go out and gamble, they're going to. I mean, I'm fairly anti-gambling. I think we can look at it from our perspective, and we know that the National Lottery is a bad idea because of the odds. It's a tax on people who aren't very good at mathematics. We know that gambling can lead to a whole host of problems if it becomes problem gambling and uncontrolled. But I think for most people that you and I know, it's having the occasional flutter on the horse race once a year or something, the Grand National. It's maybe buying a lottery card to pop in someone's birthday card or something like that. It's simple things, but it becomes really problematic. Gambling firms have got form when it comes to this. They target their shops, their betting shops, their bookies in deprived areas, deprived parts of the country, and they'll deny doing that, and they'll say it's because that's where the greatest footfall is, but they cluster. So this review, I think if it's targeting the bigger picture, not just National Lottery sales to 16 and 17-year-olds, but if it's targeting how gambling firms target children, target more vulnerable members of society, that's only a good thing.
I do agree with you on that one. And I also agree, I mean, younger people, even probably people that are 16, 17, they'll find a way to get around it because, of course, they're teenagers, they will do anyway. But absolutely, it's things like betting on football matches and things like that I think it's the main issue rather than the National Lottery. But absolutely, I don't see why, if every other form of betting is 18 years old, I don't see why that can't be pulled up. But I have to tell you about something quite funny. So I now obviously work at City AM, and so I get press releases from Betfair and all these people. And I didn't realize, because I'm not really a person that gambles ever, and so I didn't realize the breadth of the things that you can gamble on. And I had a press release come through actually yesterday that was talking about this next special episode of Gavin and Stacey that apparently is going to be written. And the bookies are betting that there's now sort of a 70% chance that it's going to be revealed what happened on that fishing trip, which will mean something to people that watch Gavin and Stacey and will mean absolutely nothing to people that don't.
It means nothing to me, but there we go.
No, but I sat there and I looked at it and I was like, I can't believe you can bet on that. That's it's just, you know, it's a funny side story from a sitcom. That's all it is, and you can bet money on that, which is absolutely crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's the way the gambling sector, the gambling industry has evolved over the years, isn't it? It used to be able to bet on the outcome of a sporting event, and then I guess it caters for a demand. You know, gamblers want to be able to, you know, keep the buzz going, to keep the gambling going. So it's not just now the outcome of a sporting event; it's the margin, it's the first person to score, it's the all sorts of factors, and it moves away from sports into, you know, fairly awful television. I have to say about Gavin and Stacey, I've never really watched it, but it's not my thing. It moves into political events, it moves into reality TV, you know, the outcome of Strictly or anything else, and that's where it becomes problematic. If you can gamble on literally anything happening in the world, I think you probably at that point realize there's a problem in the sector and with the individual gambling taking place. And probably as a gambler, if you're thinking, I must place a bet on what happened on that fishing trip on Gavin and Stacey, I think that's time to recognize you've got a problem.
Yes, I totally agree.
Now, you mentioned, Hannah, you're a journalist at City AM. I work a lot in PR. I'm a bit of a sort of media tart when it comes to this sort of thing. We've seen some interesting developments, I think, in the past few weeks around the power of PR, power of public relations, and I guess that the taste that's left in our mouths by the way that certain businesses, certain brands have behaved, both during the pandemic and also now more recently. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think we're going to be remembering the way that brands behaved and judging them for it?
Well, actually, this is, I mean, this is very much your specialism. I am merely the person that reads the press release or the consumer that sees the advert. But I do wonder, and I've been really thinking about how important is marketing and PR, because there are some brands that have done wonderful things during the pandemic, and Brewdog is the one to me that pops into mind immediately. So they are a brewery, as they sound, and they manufacture IPAs and I think lagers, but that's as far as my knowledge goes because I'm not a lager drinker. And when things got really, really bad in March, one of the first things they did was start to use one of their breweries in Scotland to manufacture hand sanitizer for the NHS
Right.
and for people that needed it the most. And I think they called it Brew Gel or something along those lines. I'm pretty sure it's changed since then. So obviously that's something that is coming out of their own pocket. It is entirely a cost to them and not a cost to the people they're supplying it to. But it's not free. So Brewdog pulled a blinder, I think, of a PR and marketing move. You will remember Dominic Cummings' famous trip to Durham, in which he went to a town called Barnard Castle to test his eyesight. I'm paraphrasing, that's not exactly what he said, but that was what all the headlines were. And Brewdog saw this, realized that there was absolute outrage, but also people just couldn't believe what they were reading. Like, what do you mean you're going on a drive to test your eyesight? That's ridiculous. So they manufactured an IPA called Barnard Castle Eyesight, 100% of the proceeds of which went to funding this hand sanitizer. And of course it sold really, really well because people were just absolutely outraged by this and at the same time thought it was hilarious. And that's how they've managed to keep this process going. And they've now, I think it was 50,000 units they've now donated to the NHS, which is a fantastic move from something like Brewdog. And I think that's definitely, it's clever as well because it forces people to try the product, which I think works in this context because you might win some new fans by people trying this thing that they have never had before. But I question whether people will really stick to these concerns that they've had about things like Weatherspoons, for example, and JD Sports. Both of those owners have said not great things during the pandemic, but out of pure convenience, and maybe Amazon's another example. A lot of people have been very angry with Amazon, but it's so convenient. And I think people are really swayed by that. So what do you think? Do you think it really matters?
I think, as consumers, we've got very short memories. And, while something is front of mind today and we think about the great things brands do immediately, I think give it 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, and really, it's just going to drop off our radar. We're not really going to remember unless someone does something really bad. There's the experiences that it was Jared Ratner, wasn't it, the jewelry store owner, who famously made that PR blunder back in the day, saying how crap his products were, and that was it was a death blow for his business effectively at that point. So brands do make, as well as having massive PR wins like Brewdog, and this week we've seen Kingfisher, who own B&Q, and we've seen all the supermarket chains offer to give the government back their business rates relief from a pandemic, because actually those businesses have been insanely profitable throughout the pandemic, DIY and supermarket for food shopping. So there's PR wins in the short term. We probably think we have warm, fuzzy feelings about these brands. They're not real things, they're brands. These are very sort of ethereal entities, but we have these lovely, warm, fuzzy feelings about them when we see and read something good. But do we really remember that in a year or two? And do we just revert to habit? For example, Amazon's a great example. I know there's a lot of outrage about how it's sort of killing the high street, how it's maybe not paying its fair share of taxes, but the convenience probably trumps that. Trumps the concerns about it, and we just revert to type. But I think the other thing to say, Hannah, is and you and I are both aware of this, but brands and PR is very manipulative at times. And it is, we do have to recognize that they are doing this on purpose. They're doing it for a reason, to influence us, to make us feel good about them, so we put our hands in our pocket and we spend more money with them. And I mean, there's examples. I'm massively cynical when it comes to this stuff, because I've sort of lifted the curtain and seen what goes on behind the scenes. So I know how the game is played. I know how this works, and you do too. But I'm seeing the stories in the last few weeks about these mysterious metal monoliths appearing all over the place. So first one in the desert in Utah, one on a hillside in Romania next to a castle, and then just a few days ago on one of my favorite beaches on the Isle of Wight, on Compton Beach. And I immediately, seeing that first one, my mind didn't go to must be aliens. It went to which brand is about to do a launch, an album launch or a game launch or something. And because the press are so obsessed with these monoliths, when the outcome is revealed, they're going to have to cover that too, because it's the punchline effectively. I can't leave people hanging with the punchline. But you hadn't come across the metal monoliths, I don't think, when I mentioned it to you the other day.
No, somehow, as somebody that's supposed to be very clued into the news, you getting in touch with me and saying, well, there are these big monoliths and some people think they're aliens. I was sat there going, sorry? That's quite the news story to miss. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a marketing stunt. It would be fun if it was aliens, and it would explain an awful lot of what's happened this year. But yeah, the reality is just a perfect PR move, because absolutely they're going to have to cover it, and they're going to have to explain, because it's the next step of the story. You can't just leave people hanging. So, hats off to them.
We're starting to see some sort of people claim them now. So the ones in the US is being claimed by an anonymous collective called The Most Famous Artist, and interestingly, they're selling replicas of them for £34,000 each. So huge money involved in this if anyone actually buys them. And then the one on the Isle of Wight on lovely Compton Beach is claimed by a 29-year-old designer called Tom Dunford. And apparently he got up at 4 o'clock. He's a designer. He had some sheet material left over. He built this thing, got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, drove down to Compton Beach and installed it. And he was doing it, obviously playing off the fact that they were being found in Utah and California and Romania, but doing it to draw attention to the Isle of Wight and the fact it's one of the safest places in the country because it's in tier 1 and fantastic tourist destination and the rest of it. But there's always going to be some outcome. So going back to my cynicism, whenever I see a story like that and a bit of mystery, because we love mystery as humans, don't we? It's intriguing and we want to know what the outcome was. Whenever I see that, my mind immediately goes to, okay, who's playing us? Who is trying to manipulate our thinking and manipulate our attention? Because that's really what it comes down to.
I think that's a really good way to be. Because I mean, brands obviously they exist to make profit and they exist to make money, and therefore if they can do it in a way that gives me a laugh, I suppose I will slightly appreciate that more than just somebody that doesn't do that at all. But I agree, it's always best to look at something with a cynical eye than being too forgiving of them. But going back to the previous point about how we have very short-term memories, do you think basically then if a business is particularly convenient, like the Amazons of the world, they can almost do no wrong? I say that to an extent. I'm sure if we found obviously if the business had to be shut down because of some sort of horrific labor scandal or something like that, that's a completely different problem. But just in terms of people feeling not that pleasant towards Amazon, but you just can't help yourself buy from it anyway? Is it just a convenience thing, and ultimately PR doesn't matter to companies that have smashed it?
I think that's fair. I think it's always going to be a balance, and probably if convenience outweighs your outrage against a particular brand for its practices or perceived practices, then yeah, that convenience is going to be the deciding factor in whether you shop with them or shop with someone else. I mean, there are things, of course, people associated with brands can do which absolutely destroys any confidence in them and trust in them. There was a website hosting company in the US a year or two ago, and the CEO was photographed trophy hunting lions in Africa. That's an immediate no, and the brand then failed, he had to leave, etc. But yeah, it's very hard, I think, when you've got a brand like Amazon that's so convenient. And I say this, I'm waiting for Amazon parcels again today. I shop with them despite being an integral part of our local business community and vice president of our Chamber of Commerce and supporting our local retailers as much as I can. The convenience, sadly, is outweighing getting in the car or walking down to the high street and shopping locally. So it's a really tricky one.
It is. I agree.
Hannah, thank you for joining us again on Talking Money from Informed Choice Radio. We'll speak again soon, but thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.